My name is Emma, and my story of pain and survival began when I was just 15 years old. Back then, my life should have been full of youthful dreams and discoveries, but it was marked by the terror that my stepfather, Tom, made me face daily. He was a cruel man, with a cold look and cutting words. His actions went beyond verbal cruelty. He subjected me to situations that no child should experience. I felt trapped in my own home, not knowing who to turn to. Whenever I tried to tell my mother about what was happening, my heart filled with hope, believing that she would protect me. However, this hope was quickly destroyed. My mother, Mary, looked at me with disdain and skepticism, thinking I was making up stories to get attention or cause trouble. His disbelief was a knife that cut me deeper than any of Tom's actions. I felt invisible and helpless, silently screaming for help. The pain of being ignored by my own mother was almost unbearable. She preferred to believe the man who manipulated her and kept her under control, rather than trust her own daughter. At night, I cried alone in my room, hugging my pillow as if it could absorb my tears and my suffering. Loneliness enveloped me like a dark cloak, making me question my own sanity. Was I really making all this up? Every time Tom entered my room, fear paralyzed me. His presence was suffocating, and I felt a chill down my spine that left me unresponsive. Through these terrifying nights, my only wish was for my mother to walk through the door and save me, but that never happened. She preferred to pretend nothing was wrong, maintaining the appearance of a perfect family. It was as if she was blind to my pain, or simply refused to see it. In the days following the abuse, I tried again to seek support from my mother. He described in detail the horrors he faced, but she always had an excuse ready. "You're exaggerating, Emma. Tom would never do that." Or, "You're just trying to get attention." These words echoed in my mind, destroying any hope that things could change. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, with no one to trust. The feeling of abandonment and helplessness grew every day. My attempts to find a way out or a solution were frustrated by my mother's indifference and the constant terror that Tom imposed on me. I knew I needed to make a radical decision to save myself, even if it meant leaving everything behind. I was about to embark on a lonely journey, determined to find my own freedom and peace, away from the hell I called home. The decision to flee came after an incident that left a deep mark on my soul. Tom crossed all limits that night, and the physical and emotional pain became unbearable. After he left my room, I sat on the bed shaking, tears streaming down my face. It was in that moment of despair that I realized I could no longer live in that house. The feeling that there was no more hope was what pushed me to act. With a heavy heart, I began to gather my things. I grabbed an old backpack and stuffed the essentials into it. Some clothes, some money I had secretly saved, and an old portrait of my mother and me from when she still smiled at me with love and trust. Every movement was filled with fear and anxiety, but also with fierce determination. I knew that leaving home was my only chance of survival. Looking around my room for the last time, I wrote a quick note to my mother. The words flowed with a mixture of sadness and anger. "Mom, I'm leaving because you don't believe me. I can't live like this anymore. Emma." I placed the note on the bed, hoping that by reading it she would finally understand the depth of my suffering. It was my last attempt to make her see the truth. With my backpack on my back, I left through the back door, trying to make as little noise as possible. Every step I took away from that house was a mixture of relief and fear of the unknown. The night was cold, and the silence on the street increased my feeling of loneliness. I looked back just once, knowing that I was leaving behind not only a physical place, but also a life of pain and suffering. The journey ahead was uncertain, and I knew I would face many challenges. But anything seemed better than continuing to live in that hell. I didn't have a concrete plan, just the desire to find a place where I could be free and safe. The courage that led me to run away was what gave me the strength to move forward, despite the fear and uncertainty. I walked for hours until I found a place where I could rest. Sitting on a park bench, I hugged my backpack and looked up at the stars, trying to find some solace. The pain of being ignored was still fresh, but hope for a better future was beginning to form in my heart. I was determined to find my own way to survive and, perhaps one day, rebuild my life away from the shadows of the past. Life on the street was a brutal reality that hit me like a punch in the stomach. The first few nights were especially difficult. The cold penetrated my bones, and the hunger was a constant pain that never left me. I slept in dark alleys or on park benches, trying to find some security in the midst of vulnerability. Every sound, every shadow, was a potential threat, and the feeling of always being in danger was suffocating. The dangers of the streets were many and varied. I met people from all walks of life, some as desperate as me, others looking to take advantage of my fragility. I was approached by strangers, threatened and harassed. Every day was a struggle to maintain my dignity and my safety. I needed to be constantly alert, developing a healthy distrust that helped me avoid dangerous situations. Dealing with hunger was another immense challenge. I searched trash cans for food scraps, and sometimes I was lucky to find something I could eat. The shame and humiliation of begging for food was outweighed by the need to survive. I quickly learned where to find help, such as temporary shelters and soup kitchens that offered hot meals. These places became my safe havens in the midst of chaos. Every day on the street was a lesson in resilience. I faced adverse weather conditions, from torrential rain to the scorching summer heat. My body slowly adapted, becoming stronger and more resilient. I developed survival skills I never thought I would need. I learned to do the most with the least, to improvise and find creative solutions to problems that arose. Despite all the adversity, these experiences forged in me a strength I never knew I possessed. I discovered an unwavering determination to move forward, no matter how difficult the path. Each challenge overcome was a victory that made me stronger and more confident in my ability to face the world alone. The street taught me to be independent, to trust my instincts, and to fight for my survival. Looking back, I realized that life on the streets, despite being brutal and merciless, was a period of growth and transformation. I learned to value every small achievement, to find beauty in the darkest moments, and to never give up, no matter how hopeless the situation may seem. Those hard days prepared me for the journey that lay ahead, molding me into a stronger, more resilient person, ready to face any challenge life threw my way. After weeks of wandering the streets, exhausted and desolate, I finally found a youth shelter. The building was old and modest, but as I walked through its doors, I felt a wave of relief. It was the first time in a long time that I didn't have to fear for my well-being at night. The feeling of being protected, even if only temporarily, brought a calm that I barely remembered existed. At the shelter, I met other people who, like me, were facing unimaginable hardships. We each had a different story, but we shared a common sense of loss and hope. There were young people who fled abusive homes, others who were abandoned or expelled. Amid this diversity of stories, I found a sense of community. We formed fast and deep bonds, united by our shared fight for survival. The conditions in the shelter were simple, but after the harsh reality of the streets, they seemed like a luxury. We had beds to sleep in, regular meals, and a safe space to stay. The food was simple but nutritious, and the roof over our heads protected us from the elements. Although there were rules and restrictions, they were a small price to pay for the safety and stability the shelter provided. At the shelter, I also had access to services that helped me begin to rebuild my life. There were counselors available to talk to, offering emotional support and guidance. I participated in workshops that taught practical skills, such as cooking, managing money, and looking for a job. These activities not only occupied my time, but also gave me tools for the future, helping me see a way out of the darkness. I began to see a ray of hope. Nights that were once filled with fear and uncertainty began to be filled with dreams of a better future. With the support of the staff and other young people, I began to believe that I could change my life. Each small step forward was an achievement that filled me with a renewed sense of purpose and direction. The shelter became a turning point in my journey. He gave me more than just a place to stay. He gave me hope. I found strength in the community around me and used the resources available to me to prepare for the challenges ahead. From that moment on, I was determined to not just survive, but to thrive, building a life I could be proud of. Determined to change my life, I began looking for a job with a tenacity that surprised even myself. Without many skills or experience, the refusals were numerous and discouraging. Each closed door felt like a blow to my hope, but I knew giving up was not an option. I spent entire days walking around the city, filling out forms and handing out resumes wherever they were hiring. Competition was fierce, and the lack of a solid professional background was a constant barrier. I couldn't offer reliable references or an impressive resume. However, I had fierce determination and a willingness to work hard, qualities that some employers appreciated. Finally, after weeks of tireless searching, I landed a part-time job at a small cafe in the city center. The cafe was a welcoming place with a relaxed atmosphere and friendly staff. My job mainly consisted of waiting tables, cleaning, and helping in the kitchen. It was a humble beginning, but each task completed filled me with a sense of accomplishment. I was building something new from scratch, and it gave me renewed purpose. The first few weeks were challenging as I was learning a lot of new things, but I was determined to do my best. Working at the cafe also gave me some much-needed daily structure. I had schedules to keep, responsibilities to assume, and goals to achieve. The work routine helped stabilize my life and gave me a sense of normalcy that I hadn't felt in a long time. Regular customers began to recognize my face, and coworkers became friends, creating a small circle of support and camaraderie. With the salary I received, I was finally able to rent a small apartment. It was a modest space, but it was mine, and the independence it gave me was invaluable. Each month, as I paid my bills and saw my progress, I felt more confident and hopeful about the future. The skills I was gaining at the cafe also boosted my self-confidence, showing me that I was capable of learning and growing. Getting this job was a milestone in my rebuilding journey. It represented the first concrete step towards a better life, away from the shadows of my past. From that moment on, I knew that with hard work and determination I could overcome any obstacle. The cafe has become more than a place to work. It symbolized the beginning of a new era in my life, where I had control over my destiny and could finally start dreaming of a bright future. Working at the cafe was the first significant step towards my independence. Each day of hard work gave me more than just a paycheck. It gave me a sense of purpose and the certainty that I was on the right path. Over time, I started saving every penny I could. Initially, it seemed like an impossible task, but the idea of having my own space motivated me to continue. After a few months of rigorous saving and careful planning, I finally managed to save up enough to rent a small apartment. The first time I entered that space, I was overcome with a mixture of relief and pride. It was far from being a luxurious home, but it was mine, and every inch of it represented my struggle and my perseverance. The apartment was modest, with simple furniture and minimalist decor, but each piece had been chosen with care and affection. The feeling of security that my own space gave me was indescribable. For the first time in many years, I could lock the door and know I was safe from the horrors of my past. My apartment became a sanctuary where I could relax and heal the wounds I still carried. I started decorating the walls with photographs and memories that brought me joy, transforming that small space into a real home. The journey of overcoming also taught me a lot about myself. I learned to manage my money, plan for the future, and value small daily achievements. Every bill paid, every meal prepared in my own kitchen, every peaceful night's sleep was a personal victory. These experiences reinforced my self-confidence and showed me that I was capable of building a dignified and happy life, despite everything I had faced. Additionally, my coffee work began to pay off in other ways. I was promoted to supervisor, which not only increased my salary, but also gave me more responsibility and recognition. This new role challenged me to develop leadership skills and provided me with a greater sense of accomplishment. The bonds I created with my coworkers grew stronger, and the cafe became an extension of my family. As I reflected on my journey to that point, I felt grateful for each obstacle I had overcome and each person who had supported me along the way. My life was still far from perfect, but I had achieved something that many considered impossible: independence and peace of mind. I was ready to face whatever came next, confident that I had the strength and determination necessary to overcome any challenge. After 10 years of silence, the decision to write a letter to my mother came in a moment of deep reflection. I sat down at the kitchen table, where so many lonely meals had been consumed, and began to put down on paper the feelings that were trapped in my heart. I wanted my mother to know that I was okay, that I had overcome the difficulties and built a dignified life. Every word written was a mix of emotions: love, sadness, resentment, and, above all, hope. Dear Mother, I began, hesitating for a moment. How can you summarize a decade of pain, growth, and resilience in a few pages? I took a deep breath and continued. I described the horrors I faced on the streets, the moments of despair, and the small victories that got me to where I was. I told him about the cafe, my first job, and how that modest job became the foundation for my independence. I shared my achievements, from renting my own apartment to being promoted to supervisor. As I wrote, tears ran down my face, staining the paper. There was so much I wanted to say, so much that needed to be expressed. I told her about the cold, lonely nights, the times I desperately wished she would believe in me and save me. But I also talked about forgiveness and healing. I told her that despite everything, I still loved her and wanted her to know that I had found my path. As I finished the letter, uncertainty took over me. I didn't know if she would read it, if she would respond, or even if it was still at the same address. However, writing that letter was something I needed to do, a way to close a painful cycle and start a new chapter. I hope one day we can meet again, I finished, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. Folding the letter carefully, I placed it in an envelope and addressed it to the house where we grew up. I walked to the nearest mailbox, each step a reminder of the journey I'd been on. Depositing the letter, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't expect a response, but the simple action of sending that letter gave me a sense of closure. Back at my apartment, I reflected on my decision to write to my mother. I realized that regardless of her response, I had found peace. Writing the letter was not only an act of communication, but also a gesture of liberation. I was ready to move on, knowing that I had done everything in my power to restore the connection with my mother and show her that, despite all the odds, I had triumphed. After 10 years of silence, the decision to write a letter to my mother came in a moment of deep reflection. I sat down at the kitchen table, where so many lonely meals had been consumed, and began to put down on paper the feelings that were trapped in my heart. I wanted my mother to know that I was okay, that I had overcome the difficulties and built a dignified life. Every word written was a mix of emotions: love, sadness, resentment, and, above all, hope. Dear Mother, I began, hesitating for a moment. How can you summarize a decade of pain, growth, and resilience in a few pages? I took a deep breath and continued. I described the horrors I faced on the streets, the moments of despair, and the small victories that got me to where I was. I told him about the cafe, my first job, and how that modest job became the foundation for my independence. I shared my achievements, from renting my own apartment to being promoted to supervisor. As I wrote, tears ran down my face, staining the paper. There was so much I wanted to say, so much that needed to be expressed. I told her about the cold, lonely nights, the times I desperately wished she would believe in me and save me. But I also talked about forgiveness and healing. I told her that despite everything, I still loved her and wanted her to know that I had found my path. As I finished the letter, uncertainty took over me. I didn't know if she would read it, if she would respond, or even if it was still at the same address. However, writing that letter was something I needed to do, a way to close a painful cycle and start a new chapter. I hope one day we can meet again, I finished, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. Folding the letter carefully, I placed it in an envelope and addressed it to the house where we grew up. I walked to the nearest mailbox, each step a reminder of the journey I'd been on. Depositing the letter, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't expect a response, but the simple action of sending that letter gave me a sense of closure. Back at my apartment, I reflected on my decision to write to my mother. I realized that regardless of her response, I had found peace. Writing the letter was not only an act of communication, but also a gesture of liberation. I was ready to move on, knowing that I had done everything in my power to restore the connection with my mother and show her that, despite all the odds, I had triumphed. When we met, I immediately noticed the transformation in my mother. His eyes, once filled with disbelief and distrust, were now marked by regret and pain. She seemed to have aged more than the 10 years that had passed, as if the weight of remorse had left deep marks on her face. When she hugged me, I felt the sincerity in her gestures, and my defenses began to give way. We sat in a quiet cafe, and she began to tell her story. She explained to me that after I left, Tom revealed his true nature in an even more cruel way. Without me there to blame, he turned all his anger and frustration on her. My mother described the years of emotional and physical abuse she suffered at his hands, and every word was like a knife to my heart. Seeing her suffering reminded me of everything I had been through, but also brought a deep understanding of the hell she also faced. Through tears, she admitted her mistake. She said that she had been blinded by Tom's manipulation and that deep down she always knew something was wrong, but she didn't want to face the truth. Her voice shook as she confessed that guilt consumed her daily, that each night without me was a reminder of how much she had failed as a mother. She looked me in the eyes, begging for forgiveness, and in that moment, I realized the depth of her regret. Her pleas for forgiveness were sincere, and each word was filled with a raw emotion that I had never seen in her before. "Emma, I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. I should never have doubted my own daughter. I hope one day you can forgive me," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. I knew those words came from the bottom of her heart, and for the first time in many years, I felt that my mother really saw me, that she understood how much I had suffered. The process of forgiving was not immediate. The pain from the past was still present, but the desire to rebuild our relationship was stronger. I decided I didn't want to let hate and resentment define my life. I accepted her request for forgiveness, knowing that it would not erase the scars, but it could be the beginning of a healing process for both of us. Our embrace, full of tears and promises of a better future, sealed the beginning of this new phase. My mother asked me to come home so we could try to fix what was broken. Despite the painful memories, I knew that the decision to forgive her and try to start over was the right choice. We had a long journey ahead of us, but we were willing to face the challenges together. That meeting was a milestone in our lives, a crucial step towards the reconciliation and love that should always have existed between us. As we talked, my mother began to reveal details about what happened after I left. His face showed signs of wear, and his voice, although firm, was filled with sadness. She told me that without me to direct his anger, Tom became even more abusive. The control he exercised over her intensified, and the atmosphere at home turned into a real hell. The man she thought she knew turned out to be an even more cruel monster. She described nights when she feared for her life, when Tom would arrive drunk and take out all his frustration on her. Verbal violence quickly turned into physical aggression, and she could no longer deny reality. My mother was trapped in a cycle of abuse that left her emotionally drained and physically scarred. Every word she spoke seemed to bring back the horror of those days, and I could see how deep her scars were. My absence, paradoxically, was what made her realize how strong she needed to be. Without the responsibility of caring for me, she was forced to face the truth about her relationship with Tom. She talked about how she sought support from help groups and how, little by little, she began to rebuild her self-confidence. "I realized that if I didn't do something, I would end up destroyed by him," she said, with tears in her eyes. His determination to take control of his own life grew every day. Eventually, after years of suffering, she found the courage to separate from Tom. The decision was not easy, and the process was full of challenges. He didn't want to let her go, and used every possible tactic to keep her under his control. However, my mother finally managed to free herself. With the support of friends and counselors, she took a giant step toward freedom, although the emotional scars were still very much present. She spoke about the feeling of relief mixed with sadness at leaving years of her life behind, but also about the fear of the unknown. "Even away from him, the ghosts of the past haunted me," she confessed. The fight to rebuild his life was arduous, but every small step forward was a victory. She told me how she dedicated herself to therapy and support groups to heal her emotional wounds, but recognized that some marks would never completely disappear. His revelation filled me with a mixture of pain and respect. My mother, who had once ignored me, had become a resilient woman who faced her own demons. The emotional scars he carried were a testament to his struggle and his strength. In that moment, I realized that we were both survivors in different ways, and that despite everything, there was still room for healing and reconciliation in our lives. As I listened to my mother's harrowing account, I felt a deep empathy and a burning desire to protect her from the suffering she had endured. I decided, right then and there, that I wouldn't leave her alone again. My mother had been through so much, and now she needed me as much as I had needed her in the past. It was time to reciprocate the love and care that I always wanted from her, even if in a different way than I had imagined. I invited my mother to live with me, and she accepted with a mixture of relief and gratitude. Preparing my small apartment to receive her was a task that I carried out with care and dedication. I wanted her to feel welcome and safe. I organized a room for her, decorated with personal touches that could bring a little comfort and joy. Every detail was a silent promise that I would be there for her no matter what. Our coexistence began with caution, but also with a shared determination to rebuild our relationship. There was much to be said, wounds to be healed and trust to be reestablished. However, there was also a mutual desire to move forward and leave the painful past behind. We started talking more, sharing stories and feelings that were previously hidden. Each conversation brought us a little closer, creating a new basis of understanding and mutual support. Taking care of my mother was a challenge that I accepted with an open heart. His years of abuse had left deep scars, both physically and emotionally. I took her to medical appointments and therapies, ensuring she received the treatment she needed to recover. Every progress, no matter how small, was celebrated as a victory. I was determined to help her find the peace and happiness she deserved. The rebuilding journey was full of ups and downs. There were days when memories of the past haunted us, bringing pain and tears. But there were also moments of joy, laughter, and rediscovery. Together, we learned to value the little things: a quiet dinner, a walk in the park, a movie watched on the couch. These little happinesses became the foundations of our new relationship. Over time, our bond grew stronger. My mother and I became not only mother and daughter, but also friends and confidants. The trust we built was based on sincerity and respect. We knew there was still a long way to go, but we were willing to face it together. The promise to care for each other gave us new hope, showing that, even after so much suffering, it was possible to find redemption and true love. Caring for my mother was a complex challenge, but also an invaluable opportunity for healing for both of us. Each day was a battle against the ghosts of the past, but also a chance to create new memories and strengthen our bonds. Our relationship, previously marked by pain and distrust, began to transform. We learned to value each other's presence, realizing that, despite all the adversities, there was still love between us. Facing our traumas together was a painful but necessary process. We talked at length about the past, allowing tears to wash away old wounds. My mother told me more details about her years of suffering with Tom, and I shared my experiences of surviving on the streets. These conversations were not easy, but each one brought us closer, helping to rebuild lost trust. Over time, we were able to turn our pain into a solid foundation for a new beginning. The journey of overcoming also taught us valuable lessons about resilience and forgiveness. We discovered that forgiving did not mean forgetting, but rather releasing the weight we carried in our hearts. Resilience became our driving force, pushing us to keep going, even when the days were difficult. I learned the importance of being patient and understanding, while my mother found the strength to face her demons and rebuild her self-esteem. Together, we began to create new memories that helped us look to the future with hope. We transformed small, everyday moments into celebrations of life. Cooking together, watching a movie, or simply talking at the dinner table became rituals of healing and connection. Every laugh shared and every victory, no matter how small, was a reminder that we were on the right path. Looking back, I realize how much we have grown and changed. My journey taught me that life is full of challenges, but also opportunities to start over. Forgiveness and resilience have become pillars in my life, guiding me to a future where the pain of the past no longer dictates my actions. My mother and I, together, found a way to turn our suffering into strength and our pain into hope. Now, finally, I feel like we can look to the future with optimism. The road ahead of us still has obstacles, but we are ready to face them together. The new beginning we make is more than just a new stage in our lives. It is proof that even in the darkest circumstances, it is possible to find light and redemption. Together, we are determined to create a future where love, understanding, and hope prevail, leaving behind the shadows of the past.